Okay, so let's continue. Go to the fourth paragraph. Go to the fourth paragraph where it says, contrary to Thrasymachus. Contrary to Thrasymachus, who said that morality is not like mountains in terms of discovering mountains. You don't discover morality like you do mountains. Well, here Peter Kreeft says, I beg to differ. He says, much evidence exists to support the view that real, objective, basic morality is discovered and recognized, not just created or man-made. Now here's an example. If a typical, or what we would call normal adult person came across a child being tortured, he or she would immediately, without being taught, without creating or inventing, without researching, they would recognize that this is wrong. Anytime, anywhere, by anyone. Now, in some ways, it's hard to show this. It's hard to find a human who's never been trained or taught anything. But if you had a person, we'll just create a fictitious person. If you had a fictitious person who would be considered typical, not atypical, but typical. But let's say this typical person is like Tarzan. Maybe. He grew up in the jungle, like Tarzan supposedly did, without other human contact, without going to school and learning ethics and so forth. If a typical adult Tarzan was walking through the forest and saw another similar-looking being like himself, a human-type being, or even a fellow ape or monkey or whatever were his companions, if he saw a young one, a child monkey or a child ape or child being beat up on or picked on or tortured, what do you think he would do?
Try to rescue.
I think it'd be easier to make the case he would try to rescue than the other case, that he would be indifferent, because he would not know enough to know right or wrong as a universal principle. I think you could make a case, based upon other kinds of evidence, that it's more probable, more likely, he would help rather than just, So why would that be the case? Why would an untrained person recognize wrong in that situation? But I think it'd be more credible to support that view that he would recognize wrong than just, it's all relative. This being is doing that to that being, and it's all relative. There's no right or wrong. So what does it matter if that being bigger, is beating up on that other being who's smaller? But at least in terms of cultures we do know, people who have had a life in society with other humans, we don't know of any exceptions except for criminals. People who do not rescue children being tortured would be considered sick, perverted, or criminal in themselves. Look at the middle part of that paragraph. For example, it says, why are there no new, healthy, permanent, normal cultures or nations that create laws that allow for regular child torture, systematic raping of women, denying pay for work, stealing, slavery of their fellow citizens? Now, I know you can find examples such as communist Russia or communist Cuba where things are done. But again, those cultures don't last long. And those are exceptions to the rule. In most cultures, you don't find cultures making laws that allow for child torture, although we have abortion, but that's a newcomer in American society. Systematic raping of women, denying pay for work, stealing and slavery of our fellow people. That's not a normal thing for a healthy society, especially in its young days. So why not? Why is it so common to find societies, as a rule, that do pay people for their work and that don't torture children as a common practice and so forth? How can 24,000 cultures be so similar for so long unless there is a rule or law that the soul knows of? Again, in C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity, the famous example of stepping on the foot of another person. When the person, recognizes that was wrong to have his foot stepped on, C.S. Lewis writes, where do they get the idea that was wrong? Now, let's change the example of Tarzan again. Okay, let's say Tarzan now is walking through the jungle. He never went to school. He never had ethics class. Tarzan knows nothing but the laws of the jungle. If then C.S. Lewis were to appear in the jungle and step on his foot with spike heels or a very heavy kind of boot with hard soles, and he did a real hard step on Tarzan's foot, do you think Tarzan might recognize instinctively that was a wrong thing? I think, again, you can make a case, a convincing case before a courtroom and win the case, that it's probably more likely that he would recognize that was wrong, though he has no ethics training, than the other way around. That he would go, I have intense pain in my foot. Caused by that person. I never did a thing to him. He did it to me. And go about his business. He would probably immediately know that was wrong and fight back, because that was a wrong that deserved punishment. So how can 24,000 cultures be so consistent for so long with the same kinds of golden rule types of activity? Okay, now here's another perhaps entertaining example that makes a serious point. Go to the last main paragraph. We're going to create here a scenario with a man and his new girlfriend. Go to the third line, the last big paragraph. Let's imagine a man who steals from a store. And he may try to justify it or excuse it to avoid guilt or shame. So once again, what do you call that when a person steals, but they try to make themselves feel better? They rationalize, they justify what they did in their own mind. Okay? So let's say that a person were able to do that. They could steal money. They could steal money and somehow convince themselves that it wasn't wrong in that case. So they have no trouble sleeping at night. They don't have a guilty conscience because they've convinced themselves it was okay. Now, I doubt very strongly that they could really be free from a guilty conscience. But just for the sake of argument, let's say that they could somehow get free of the guilty conscience. Then what? What if he's dating a new girlfriend? If he has a new girlfriend, do you agree with this? That he will typically not admit that he stole money. Is that common human nature? That even though you're justified in your own mind, you've convinced yourself, would that person take the risk? New girlfriend that they want to impress? Would they take the risk that they could tell their girlfriend, I took money that wasn't mine? I think you could also persuade a judge and jury, that's not typical. They wouldn't do that. Now, what does that show?
It's not really right.
That it's not really right. That they can convince themselves, maybe, because they're a sinner, that what they did was okay. But here's another person, another mind. It's not their mind, it's someone else's mind. And they're afraid to take the chance. If they tell that person they want to impress, I did this thing, it's called taking money. If life were relativistic, could they tell the person if they were a relativist? They could, in theory. It's hard to live a relativistic life, but in theory they could do it, and they would say, okay, well, I can't judge you. There's no right or wrong that you took money. But in real life, he would be reluctant to tell that person, his new girlfriend, he took money. Let's keep looking at this example. He would be ashamed to admit it. I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong line. He will not admit that he's a thief or criminal out of his natural instinct to hide the shame of guilt-giving wrong. Also, now this is even worse, also if he stole from his girlfriend, his new girlfriend, he would be ashamed to admit it, feel guilty if she found out about it, and then she would accuse him probably immediately of doing wrong. If he denies it or lies about it, then a similar wrong is exposed, and if he is found to be a liar or dishonest. Have you noticed in American society today? Now, I'm kind of freshly back into our country. I've been gone for many, many years. I come back once every now and then on furlough. But, sometimes it's the newcomer who sees his own country afresh. So as I'm coming back into America since last May, after being gone for 22 years, apart from occasional furloughs, I've noticed that one of the most common values that relativistic people promote is honesty. I saw a talk show the other night. They asked Brad Pitt on a talk show. Brad is going to have a new baby through his new girlfriend. And they said, Brad, you're going to be a new father. What are you going to teach your child as a new father? He only had, a couple of seconds to give a sound bite. So he said, I'm going to be a father who emphasizes honesty. Okay, I want my child to have a father who's honest and teaches honesty. And I've noticed that's a very common word today in American culture, the promotion of honesty. So look back at our example then. If he steals money from someone else and his girlfriend finds out about it and he doesn't want to tell her he took money, so he's not being honest, or if he stole her money and she finds out he lied to her, she'll probably react the way a Brad Pitt would react. That's not honest. That's of important value, honesty. You're not being honest. It's okay if you have other lovers, but, be honest. Tell me if you do. So here we have various scenarios where people instinctively want to prevent being shamed because they lied or stole money and so forth. So it says, therefore, guilt and shame appear to be a universal, instinctive, programmed thing regarding human nature as a warning signal. I want to put on the board here two things. On this side, physical, you can write this down if you want. This is not in your paper per se. Physical warning signs physical warning consequences. And over here, moral warning signs and moral, I should say just consequences. Moral consequences. Everybody agrees that, apart from certain Hindus, for example, everybody agrees that there are physical things in life. And we established last lesson, made a good case, that there are spiritual things, immaterial things. So we have a universe that has physical things and immaterial things. Physical, spiritual, material, immaterial. If the physical side has warning signs, then why not this side? If the physical side has consequences if we don't obey the warning signs, then why not that side? If the universe is a universe, it's united into a whole, an ecosystem. If things are integrated into a whole, a structure that is orderly, then since we've already established there's a spiritual realm, a non-material realm. So why not, it would be consistent in a universe that if this has signs and consequences, so does that. Isn't that logical? Now, over here, what's a good warning sign? What if you eat too much sugar for too long without brushing? What's a warning sign? Well, you would get pain, tooth pain. Tooth pain. Pain is a signal that the body sends when there's danger present. When a bad thing's going to happen, then you get this warning. Warning, warning, you get pain. And if you ignore that pain, for example, if you sprain your ankle, you get pain as a warning. So that warning is telling you don't do what with your ankle for a while? Don't walk on it. The nerve endings are telling you this is not ready to be walked on. Warning. And if you choose to ignore that warning and walk on your sprained ankle, or run on it, or play football on it, you're going to be in worse trouble. So like tooth pain, you might have a root canal as your consequence, which is far worse than a cavity, or sprained ankle. You could have then a broken foot because you ignored the warning sign. So these are examples, of course. And over here, what is a common everyday warning sign when people steal money or lie or cheat?
Shame and guilt.
Guilt and shame. Warning, you did something wrong. So, for example, if you steal, maybe no one knows except God and you, but you have a warning sign, an instinctive, built-in, programmed warning sign. You feel different. You don't feel clean or innocent or good as you did before. You feel you did something wrong, a warning sign. And our culture is training our youth to ignore. For example, and we do clever things to avoid guilt and shame. So what do abortion doctors do to avoid guilt and shame in their own mind?
They change their lexicon.
Okay, what is this new word for this thing they abort? Womb entity or tissue or a neutral sounding fetus or thingy. It's a female thingy in the stomachy or whatever. Change the word, make it sound like a thing, a blob. In fact, I've even heard people say blob. Mothers. I've heard mothers say, well, I got this blob thing. Okay. So they'll do that to play games. Again, we're applying Wittgenstein, who taught us to play language games. And so that helps us to be free from guilt and shame, or so they think. But if you know stories, testimonies of doctors who performed abortions, and they ignored the warning signs, the guilt they felt, if you know some of the testimonies, what happened to them later on when they kept on aborting and they just couldn't deal with it after a while?
Suicide.
Many have committed suicide and left suicide notes. They couldn't live with themselves. They ignored the signs, and then they felt so bad when they realized it wasn't a womb entity but a human being, they committed suicide. Or, if we don't commit suicide, we will face judgment from the judge, God. So, once again, I really like this term, physical laws. We all know about what's a good physical law? I just gave you an example earlier. Gravity. If there are physical things, there are physical laws. If there are spiritual things or moral things, then there are moral laws. That would be consistent with a universe. Ecosystem. Things are integrated. Things are consistent. Now here's a funny thing. It's not funny really, but it is a funny thing, but it's very serious. And here's where we can apply philosophy. It amazes me that people who recognize both sides, I'm talking now about people like us who believe in the soul, they believe in spirituality. This is so common. It's amazing to me that people who believe both sides. This is also the spiritual side. Morality is spiritual, it's not physical. It's incredible that people believe both sides, and they will be very consistent on this side. They know that gravity is a law. They know if you violate gravity, there are serious consequences. They know that crossing a street involves physical laws. If you walk in front of a Mack truck, you're going to have a very bad day. So they know there are physical laws, and you can't do anything you want. You've got to do the right thing at the right time, or you're going to pay a big price in the world of physicality, such as crossing streets and watching for moving vehicles. But then they come to this side, and they go nutso. They just have the most exotic and fun kind of theology or spiritual worldview or philosophy that's irrational, contradictory, and they excuse it like my taxi driver friend in the Philippines by calling it what? What did my friend call his contradictory prayer to Mary and God? It's a mystery. And you read many theologians who write their theology, and when it comes to the spiritual realm and the divine realm, they say it doesn't have to make sense or be consistent or coherent. It doesn't have to follow the rules of logic or laws. It's in another realm of mystery. Now, mystery is different from madness. Here we have logic, and sometimes here we have non-logic. Another word for this would be non-mystery. What's another word for non-logic? Like the Trinity. Well, no, I didn't say that word. I'm saying non-logic. Here we have non-mystery. What might this other synonym be? Mystery. Are there some things in the Bible that are a mystery? Like what?
Oh, like Trinity.
The Trinity. Now we know a few things, but there's much we don't know about the Trinity. So we might call that one of those examples of a mystery. There are some things that we'll never know in this lifetime about the Trinity, right? But we also know things that are not mystery. They're very clear and very logical. But there's one more category that people often put over here because it's spiritual and mystical, and what it really is, instead of being non-mystery, instead of being mystery, which are legitimate, it becomes madness, contradictory. And that is not scriptural. That's not God's truth. God's not a God of madness. This is also, another word would be illogic. As opposed to logic or non-logic, it's illogic. Do you think God accepts illogic?
No.
No. Now here's a problem on our part. Some Christians who like philosophy, like I do, I like philosophy, that's why I'm teaching it. But some people who are philosophical say that everything must be logical and non-mysterious. We can know everything, we should know everything. And they think they have God all figured out. I don't think we'll ever have, at least at this time, God all figured out. We have to accept there are some things that we don't know. God, what does it say in Deuteronomy 29:29? The revealed things. Anybody have that memorized? Deuteronomy 29:29. Book of Deuteronomy 29:29. The revealed things belong to us and our children. But the things not revealed to us belong to God. I'm paraphrasing it, but the revealed things that God has revealed to us belong to us. We know them. He revealed them to us. They belong to us and our children. But then it says the things not revealed belong to Him. That means there are things He has not revealed to us. They remain a mystery. But you can find nothing in Scripture that commends madness or illogic. And my point here I'm making is that many people, when they talk about this side of life, they think that it's okay to have contradictions, such as in Hinduism, or there are many, many contradictions in Hinduism, but it's excused as mystery, as being part of the mystical world. But there's no place in theology or Bible or in philosophy for irrational. But let's not be too extreme here and ignore mystery. We have to allow for mystery. But mystery is not madness. So this is legitimate, and this is legitimate, but that's never legitimate. But people often think that this side allows for that. If you take my class in world religions someday, I'll show you a lot of examples of this on the Hindu side, in Hindu thinking. In fact, they even glory in it. They love it. Even Mormonism has a lot of this. So don't be extreme here or here. Be balanced, but don't let this side, even though it is more up there or out there or higher, even though it's a higher level and a little bit more fuzzy, it still has laws. There's still order to it. There's still laws. But it's not madness. It's not illogic. So in some ways, the laws are part of logic. But there are things here that are true and real, but they're not illogic or madness. So there are laws on both sides. So, and this is my example. And we know this exists. This is a universal feeling of guilt and shame. Some cultures have guilt that they emphasize, some cultures emphasize shame. They're both closely related. And I find it to be comforting to know that the world is consistent, that God made the world that fits together both physically and spiritually with these laws.
A question and answer time. I want to remember to ask you your view on Christians committing suicide.
Okay. Yeah, hang on to that until we have question and answer time. Okay, so the bottom part of your page, 8C. So concepts and words like lying, harming, helping are always or normally conceived and interpreted the same way. Wrong and right, respectively. This is evidence for objective morality, not subjective results of random dust and gas evolution. Okay, now I got another example for you to drive a point home. Let's say we're on a trip in South America. We're all on a big bus together. And let's say that the world is like the relativists say it is. That each culture can invent and make up their own morality. So we're all on this bus, and let's say that right now we pull up to a restaurant in Peru. And it so happens, in our example of relativism, it so happens that the restaurant that we're at in Peru has invented for their own morality that food should have rat poop put in it without the customer knowing. That behind the kitchen door they sprinkle in a large dose of rat poop, because that's how they define food for tourists. And there might be places that do that for fun. But we're talking now about an everyday thing that is a common practice that they consider a good thing. That tourists are given rat poop, and even their own people. Whoever comes to eat there, Peruvians or visitors, they're given rat poop as part of their food, mixed into their food. Now, if we were going to be relativists and consistent relativists, what should we do when we arrive at a restaurant in a foreign country?
Whatever they do.
Eat without question.
Well, okay, you could eat without question, but you could also do what? If you knew that every country had different invented laws, and you couldn't take anything for granted.
You could ask what their laws are.
Everything's up for grabs.
You could ask what their laws are.
Yeah, you better find out. Okay, can I see your law book on what's legal for food in restaurants? How do you interpret in your culture right or wrong food? Oh, look at this, bus passengers. Here in this culture, they invented good food as being food with rat poop. Okay? But they couldn't say it's wrong. They might not eat it, but they could never say, oh, that's terrible, that's wrong. They can't do that because they're relativists. There's no wrong, okay? Now, let's say that we eat or not eat, whatever your choice is, in our bus, and then we go to the next country. And we think, okay, now we're in Brazil. Different culture, and every culture invents their own morality. There's no universal. There's no right or wrong. What if you find out, if you're smart to ask, I think now we'd be wise to ask, because what happened in Peru, we have to find out, okay, can we please have your dictionary or your law book and find out how you define good food? And what if their definition was one pea per day? One single pea, green pea, per day. Would that be satisfying? Maybe not, but you couldn't say it's wrong. And what if they charged, $100 for that single pea, or you couldn't get anything? And there's no other place to eat. Because they have a law there. They invented a law. You have to eat that or nothing. And if they catch you eating something else that's more than one single pea, they're gonna fine you, because that's the invention that they made that's good food for that culture, and so forth and so on. See, what you have to do if you live a relativistic life and you travel, that means you have to not take anything for granted. Maybe in a certain culture, walking on the street, if you're not one of them, you can be arrested, because the streets are only to be walked on by their own people. This gets ridiculous, but the point I'm making is, you would be spending all your time learning what they define as good and bad. But in the real world, you can go anywhere and usually get by, even without knowing the language. Because you know that when you go into a restaurant that you don't understand the menu, it's got all these foreign words on it and strange sounding foods. You know that food is food, and people in general don't put rat poop in your food. And you can walk on streets without being arrested. And you can get a meal. And we have this thing called conventions. We have a thing called mankind, humanity. And we know what it is to live a daily life. And we have universals going on all the time. Absolutes and universals. Otherwise, the world doesn't function. You couldn't travel to foreign countries if you're a relativist consistently. Okay, one final page. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, this first example is a postmodern example. Here's a very common argument by postmodernists to promote relativism, pluralism, subjectivism. Here it is. They say that morality is like eating X. Some like it and some dislike it. But there's no real right and wrong, but only like or dislike. Now, before you keep reading about the response, they say that morality is like a plate of food. We have eggs here and ham there. Could a person say, objectively, absolutely, anywhere in the world, eggs are wrong and ham is right? Eggs are evil and ham is good. Could a person do that? Not normally.
They'd be a fool.
People would say, only I like eggs, I don't like ham, or I like ham, I don't like eggs. But they can never say, that's evil, that's good.
Well, they could with a ham in some cultures.
But I mean in general, without going too far here. In normal life, you would never call eggs universally evil, right? As a societal definition. Okay? So they're saying that's how morality is. You can't say sodomy is evil and non-sodomy is good. Because sodomy and non-sodomy are like eggs and ham. All you can say is, I like sodomy, but he doesn't. That's their argument. Now, you have to respond with proving or indicating reason to believe that sodomy and non-sodomy are different than eggs and ham. How would you do that? How could you philosophically respond that sodomy and non-sodomy are different than eggs and ham? And that it's not just, I like it or I don't like it, but it's right or it's wrong. How could you respond to that?
Looking at the results of it, possibly.
Look at the results of it? That would be one way. Because eating eggs and ham will sustain you. You can live on eggs all your life or ham all your life. But sodomy has been shown to produce AIDS, for example. Whereas non-sodomy doesn't.
And incontinence.
And other STDs. Okay? As well as probably guilt feelings in most people. Okay, but what else? Besides the consequence argument, which is a good argument, but besides consequences, what else could you say in terms of philosophical? But do you see that they have a point? I mean, it looks like they have a point. Mm-hmm. Their argument looks fairly convincing. Some arguments, take a while to ponder and figure out a response to. And this one is a little bit challenging because, in a way, it does seem like, on the surface, that moral practices, in some ways, could be understood like food, different kinds of food. Some like spinach, some don't. Some like sodomy, some don't. But all you can say is, I like it or I don't like it, not it's right or wrong. Yeah, Lewis.
Aren't they using a subjective definition to describe objectivity then?
Are they using a subjective basis?
Apples and oranges. A subjective basis to describe an objective something else. I mean, they're trying to use the physical definitions for an intangible, non-physical, and saying it's the same, and it's not.
Okay. Well, for the sake of time, thank you for that. And maybe this will address what you're saying or come in what you're saying. Because of our lack of time, let's look at our page here and see how Paul Chamberlain responds to this. See if this makes sense to you. Here's Paul Chamberlain's response to this postmodern example. Again, let's back up to that example, top line. Example, morality is like eating X, they say. Some like it, some dislike it. Some dislike it. But there is no real right and wrong, they say, but only like or dislike. Paul Chamberlain says they are confusing what's known as private truth with public truth. You see, liking ham or eggs is a private opinion. But right and wrong go beyond private. They become a public thing. For example, likes and dislikes, he says, are subjective and private because I or you have a private or personal taste. But public, societal views are or can be of a more objective nature. For example, killing people's mothers is universally and publicly considered wrong. Whereas eggs and ham, that's purely subjective. But killing mothers is usually considered wrong in the public sense. And this recognition describes the ideal state of reality, not just my or your private personal opinion. So do you follow what he's saying? So he's saying that eggs and ham are like oranges, and right and wrong are like apples. They're different categories. One's a private taste. My taste buds like this. The other is a moral issue, which is not personal taste buds, but it's a public, universal recognition of right and wrong. So they're not the same thing as food. Furthermore, look at the middle part of the paragraph where it says also. Also, the above example of eating X, like ham or eggs, only tells us something of the eater, not the X that is eaten. Okay, if I say I don't like ham, does that tell you anything about the ham?
No, you don't.
The focus is on me. I don't like the ham. It doesn't give you enough information to judge the ham. So not liking eggs or ham tells you about me. And I'm an individual. I'm a personal, subjective individual. The X, for example, good pizza or justice or not killing mothers, can be objective in nature, even if a person subjectively dislikes it. Furthermore, if people like to kill subjectivists or torture mothers, or etc., which would produce an unlivable situation, then all a subjectivist can say is that he or she what? Dislikes the situation, not that it is absolutely wrong. So again, if a postmodernist says to you in a conversation on a bus or a taxi or in your neighborhood, you know, morality is like eggs and ham, all you can do is say you like it or don't like it. You can't say it's right or wrong. Okay, now don't do this in real life, but you could just imagine with him in a conversation, what if I took a gas tank, a can of gas, and sprinkled it on your house, and then lit your house on fire? Would you just say at the end of your house burning down, I didn't like that. That's it. Or, I didn't like that. But you could never say, that's wrong. You shouldn't burn my house down. You owe me a house. All they can say is, I don't like it, or I like it. But people don't do that. People don't respond that way. Again, there's this law going on. They're moved by a law to say, that's wrong. I don't like it. You burned my house down. I'm going to punish you for that by calling the cops. A law is pushing them. A moral law is pushing them. So here's what happens in a society if it were consistently relativistic. Look at the last line in the first paragraph. This would mean, if subjectivism is the case, that courthouses and jails and prisons and policemen should be removed. You can't have a jail if there's no right or wrong. You don't need police if there's no right or wrong. You can never dial 911 because there is no right or wrong. All there is I like it or I don't like it, but there's not right or wrong. You can't retaliate.
No such thing.
You can't seek justice. You can't judge someone. You can't go to court. Anybody. You can't call the cops, nothing, except say, or, well, I like that, or I didn't like that. But that's it. For example, if you're served ham or eggs, and you didn't like the ham or eggs, you didn't like the taste, could you sue and win in a court of law the cook who made your ham and eggs because you didn't like the taste? No. I mean, if it wasn't poisoned with real rat poop, but if it were edible, and it just happened to be that you liked your ham less salty, you could not win in a court of law that it just didn't suit your personal taste. But you could win in a court of law in real life if the cook murdered your son, because that's a whole other thing. That's a universal law that we know instinctively. So this is beyond eggs and ham. And of course, relativists are happy to call 911 when a crime has happened. Relativists are glad that there are jails to keep sex offenders away from their children. relativists are happy that there are policemen when there are dangerous things going on and so forth. Okay, let me tell you another example that I think you'll find interesting, and this might be a true story. Whether it's true or not, you can imagine the scenario. Let's say, and this might be true, that a teacher was teaching a class, and in this case, that the teacher is Christian, and the student was a subjectivist, a relativist. The student did not believe in absolute values, absolute right and wrong. Okay, so one day, the student had to turn in a paper, an essay. And so the relativistic, subjective, the non-believer in absolute values and right and wrong did a paper, gave it to the teacher. According to the story that I read from Paul Chamberlain, the teacher marked F for a grade on the paper. It was in a folder, a colored folder. The folder said, had the letter F, failure, and then it gave a reason. I don't like the color of your folder. And gave it back to the student. So the student failed the class, failed the paper. It was a major paper. He failed. What do you think the student did? The student who doesn't believe in right and wrong, that everything's relative. What do you think the student did?
He protested.
Oh, you better believe it. The student protested. He was angry. He was upset. He came to the teacher, this is not right. I worked hard on this paper. I spent 2 weeks. I didn't work for 2 weeks at my job. I had to work to pay tuition. I didn't work for 2 weeks so I could put my time on this paper to show my arguments for relativism. This paper was giving evidence for subjectivism, that there's no universal right or wrong. This is not fair. You gave me an F. And your F is because you didn't like the color of my folder. Did you read my paper? No. Why? You didn't even read my paper and you failed me because the color of my folder. What did the teacher say to him, do you think? You believe, Mr. Student, that there's no absolute right or wrong. Everything's relative. So my value system is I don't like yellow. And your folder's yellow. Therefore, I don't like it. And you can't complain because there is no absolute right or wrong. So you see, once again, not only is relativism unlivable, but it's irrational. Self-defeating, irrational, and it's not livable. You can't live life this way. And that student was upset, but he shouldn't have been because that was his own view applied back to him. So again, subjectivist people, students or teachers who expect fairness, grades, diplomas, their paycheck. When the relativistic teacher at Harvard goes to get his paycheck, if they said, we decided our value system is different now. We decided that paying teachers is not what we value. We don't like to do pay for teachers as of last week. So no more pay for you. And of course the relativistic teacher would say, that's not right. I earned that money. And they could say, there's no right or wrong. There's no absolute. Just say you don't like it, but you can't say it's wrong. Just go, I'm not getting paid. I'm going to starve to death. I'm going to freeze in this Boston winter. I don't like it, but it's not wrong. So, here's the realm of the ridiculous. Fourth paragraph. If subjectivism and relativism is right, which is already a contradiction, that's a self-defeating sentence already, then parents, schools, governments should stop all absolute type of teaching of basic right and wrong. Example, it is not always wrong to cheat. It's not always wrong to lie. It's not wrong to steal or murder. Steal all you want. Cheat all you want. Murder all you want. Because there's no absolute right or wrong. Imagine a society were like that. I mean, it's already getting bad enough, but imagine if school said, cheat all you want, lie all you want, steal all you want, murder all you want, because there is no right or wrong. You choose what you want to do. And we're getting that way. How would you define America in one word? What's the most important value in America today?
Self.
What's the word?
Okay, I'll put it this way. If you had to describe to a foreigner, and I listen to presidential speeches to get this idea, what do you think is the most common word to describe American culture? Like going to Iraq. We want to give the Iraqis blank.
Freedom.
Okay, I hear the word freedom the most when I listen to speeches. And I've often thought about, you might think about this too. How would you define in one word the most common definition of what it is to be an American? What makes America different than other cultures? Okay, one of the most common words is the concept of freedom. But if there are no boundaries, no laws, no universals, no absolutes regarding freedom, then you do end up with people doing what they want. Sodomy, cheating, casinos, pornography, lying, stealing, murdering. And the things that used to be called evil are now called good. So pretty soon, to be consistent, we should say that cheating is good or neutral. Cheating or murdering is neutral, to be consistent, because we've already said that about sodomy and pornography. So why not say that cheating is okay? It's neutral. And if we end up in that, if we go that far, we're really in a perfectly hellacious world where everything is neutral. Killing, cheating, lying, stealing, gambling, pornography, sodomy. In other words, let's not just go halfway, let's go all the way. But no, let's go back and have boundaries on freedom. So I would add the word. You tell me, what would God add? If America is known as freedom, how would God change that definition? If you keep the word freedom, how would it be in God's dictionary? What kind of freedom?
Freedom to do as we ought.
Okay, freedom to do as we ought. What else would you say?
Responsibility.
A responsible freedom? Okay, I would say freedom with boundaries. That's what I would say, from my own definition. Freedom with boundaries. Because the Bible gives freedom, it also gives boundaries.
Limited.
Isn't that what you as parents have discovered? Your kids need an amount of freedom to be human beings, to learn to be responsible, to learn to make their own decisions. They have to have some freedom. You can't keep them in a box all the time. But you can't let them do whatever they want, can you? Most parents are afraid their kids will do the wrong thing, so you have to give them guidelines, boundaries. But America is moving, if you haven't noticed, America is moving toward no boundaries. We got rid of sodomy boundaries. We got rid of casino boundaries. We got rid of pornography boundaries. And someday we'll get rid of more boundaries unless we go backward, not forward in this destructive path. So we have to find arguments as well as Scripture to say that healthy life is freedom with boundaries. Thank you. We'll continue our next session next time.